Hi, and welcome to Georgina Blooms. I'm Kathy Bruce, your host, and today we are in Tony Snider's yard, and we're going to talk about peonies. This is what you want to see in the spring and early summer, and this is what you're seeing now. So, Tony is going to help us understand the best way for you to look after your peony in the fall, and if you need to divide it and move it somewhere, he's going to help you with that as well. Please stay tuned. Welcome back, and joining me is Tony Snider. Peony expertise above and peonies and hostas are who you are in my mind. Mm-hmm. And Tony has a beautiful variety of peonies. And if you're ever walking along Lake Drive, when they are in full bloom, because you have a ton of them in the front, mm-hmm. which is awesome, they are to die for gorgeous and so worth having, even though they're short-lived. Please don't rain, you know, no storms, because that takes them out like instantly. So here, come the fall, they don't look too good.
And they really don't look good this year because of the weird weather we've had. So there's a lot of this blotchiness on the leaves this year.
Water.
It's not something we like. That's caused by water and humidity and then heat and drought and the mixture of the two. They don't like it.
Yeah.
They should be fine come next spring. We'll talk about how to make sure they're fine, but they should be fine.
So the fall is the time.
The time. Fall is when you're going to do your best to clean up whatever you got in your garden that has to be cleaned up, in terms of peonies in particular. Yep. It's also the best time to divide peonies. The standard rule about peonies is once you plant them, don't move them unless you have to, because they have very, very complicated underground root systems, as you can see. This is a plant that was in a pot for 1 year, and that's what the roots look like. So you can imagine if your plant has been in the ground for 15 years, what you've got going on under the ground when you try to dig it up. Yeah. And we're going to do that sort of for you in one of the next segments. But so there's 3 kinds of peonies, and that's important to know because
you treat
each
them
of them is kind of different. So the herbaceous peonies, which is the one that you see all the time, kind of everybody seems to have. The
regular peonies.
Regular peonies. They have to be and all peonies have eyes. You want to come closer, Jeremiah? You can. All peonies have eyes, and they're visible in the fall. You can see there's some different sized ones here. That's next year's growth, immature. So if you accidentally break those off, you're going to have trouble next year. And if you plant them too deep, you're going to have trouble next year.
Planting too deep also doesn't allow for blooms.
Yeah, for herbaceous peonies.
Right.
Herbaceous peonies, those eyes should never, ever be more than 2 inches below the ground. Yeah. And I keep them at about 1 inch below the ground.
And when you top dress around them, never on it.
Right, never on top of it.
Yeah.
Okay. You'll notice now there's the second kind of peony that is kind of normal is the tree peony, which you treat completely differently. Tree peonies, those eyes will be above the ground, and you have to plant the bottom part much deeper because you have to plant the graft. Most tree peonies are grafted onto regular herbaceous stock. The graft where the two join has to be below the ground, so it's much deeper than with these, and it doesn't matter so much because the buds on the tree peony are above the ground.
Right. Right.
And then there's this peony, which is an Ito peony. There's a little picture of it there. They are a fascinating story. They're a cross between the herbaceous and the tree peony. And this man, Ito, his last name was, he was Japanese, worked almost his entire professional life trying to get the two combined, hybridized
into a
single plant. that had the, because tree peony roots are much strong, stems are much stronger, and so he had this dream that he was going to create a peony with a strong stems, but not like the herbaceous peony in other ways. So he finally succeeded in doing it and had some plants started, and he died before he ever saw them bloom.
Oh, wow.
And then
they are spectacular.
And they're spectacular. And then his wife sold them to an American, the seedlings, and the rest is history. Now there's all kinds of itos. But their buds are, some of them are below the ground and some of them are just above the ground. So you got to plant those higher up than you would plant the tree peony.
Right.
You plant that much more like the herbaceous peony, but you don't need to cover all of the eyes because there are some on the bottom of the stems and they'll be fine, even if they're showing during the winter.
And so, and a tree peony, you do not cut back in the fall. An Ito peony and a regular herbaceous peony, those you cut back to what, about 3 inches?
Yeah, well, the herbaceous ones you can go almost to the ground because the buds shouldn't be showing above the ground. But this one you should only cut back as far as you see live buds.
Okay.
You don't cut the buds off, obviously.
I cut everything back 3 inches,
and
I figure
they're fine. Yeah.
good stuff and snow are going to collect in there.
Yeah.
So, but so this Ito you cut back, herbaceous, regular peonies you cut back, tree peony you leave alone. Yeah. Now Tony has worked really hard in the garden to show us about digging out one that's already been in his garden for a number of years, and he's going to, it's partially dug out, but he's going to take it out and show us how to divide as well. So if I'm going to hand you the shovel.
Let's just see if we can do that fast. This will be a strength test for me.
But if you get a look at, oh my goodness.
So it's loose and they're very hard to get out because they have big shoots. So I was just telling Kathy that a trenching shovel is a good use.
And when we come back, we'll see more of Tony working hard. Welcome back. And Tony has pulled out the peony partially out of the ground. Well, it is pulled out of the ground now, but the roots are like carrots.
Yeah.
So we're going to get it over to the table. Oh my goodness. Wow, wow.
So now here you can see very well, all of those little buds are underneath the ground.
Oh, wow.
See, and they're not very far underneath, but they have to be underneath for herbaceous peony, and this is herbaceous.
Yeah.
Okay, if this was an Ito, some of those buds would be up here on the stems and you'd cut it off to about here in the fall. If it was a tree peony, the buds would be up here and you wouldn't cut it off at all.
Right.
Just leave it alone.
Right.
Okay.
I always find it fascinating of just the size of what comes out of the ground. The roots of plants, one of the nice things about gardening is when you do, divide, you learn a lot about a plant and your own strength. Now, so to divide this.
To divide this, well, first of all, if you were doing it and we were doing it like really, really well, the best thing to do is to take it and put it under a sharp hose, not too sharp. You don't want to knock the buds off and they're fragile, so you got to be careful. But you get all the soil out so you can see what you're working with. And then you try to find a section that you have between 3 and 5 of these eyes on. You want to have at least 3 on any division you make.
Right.
Inevitably, some pieces will come off. like this, but it will grow.
Oh, wow.
It has an eye. So anything like this, you can salvage by putting someone with a small corner of your garden until it becomes a big enough plant, but certainly don't throw it away. Even little pieces that break off like this, if you put them somewhere in your garden, an inch or two below the ground, some of them will take. And you will see little peonies in it.
Cool. I love this one. Like, that's just so perfectly intact.
So then you find out when you clean off all of the soil, you get a good look at what's there.
Yeah.
And you usually find a place that, here's another one, look, even that's smaller, but it's got a bud.
That's so cool. So if I wanted, would I take a shovel and jam it
if that's what
down
it takes, you could. I'm going to try and do it with a sharp knife.
Oh.
If you're going to do it with a shovel, my advice to you is to leave it in the ground so that there's something supporting the bottom of the plant when you're shoving the shovel into it. But
Do you want to, is this the knife you
we're going to try. So, as I said, you're looking for, so this section over here has at least 3 buds. So if we can cut down through there, sometimes you'll get lucky and the thing will just pull apart where you want it to. This one
really?
This one wasn't going to do that. Okay?
Oh,
So,
wow.
there you go. You got lots of
Look
buds,
at the
a
flip
good chunk
side.
of plant. Now, the thing to do, if you have a horticultural, like, I think it's sulfur dust, you just go to the garden center and they'll have. If you have that, you can spread that on there to help prevent any disease from forming. But if you don't, just leave this somewhere in the sun until that forms like a little bit of a coating over it.
Oh, like a scab.
It's just an additional precaution. It will probably be fine, even if you put it back in the ground right now. But an additional precaution is always a good thing. So if you put some like horticultural dust on it, it'll be great.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, and that's
wow.
So, and then you do the same thing, depending on how big the sections you want.
Right.
You keep.
Wow.
You can keep dividing it and dividing it. So
you could fill your neighborhood here,
yes,
Tony,
you could.
with one plant.
With one plant.
I'm really taken with how nice and healthy the eyes are.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this part of looking after what is freshly cut, really, really important.
Similar with irises. When you divide irises, sometimes the rhizome, you have to break the rhizome to get it apart because they're all wound in. Very same thing. If you just leave it out in the sun for a little bit and let it scab a bit, it's just a safer bet.
Okay. So.
And I would have actually shown you how to use the horticultural dust. I thought I had some, and I don't. I went looking for it this morning. I thought, that's not going to be helpful.
Sprinkle.
But anyway, any garden center you go to will have it, and you just add it.
And it comes apart.
Well, that's good. You could make that into 2 probably now.
Wow. Well, I'm just going to leave it together.
Yeah.
For.
That's good. That's all right. All of those things will root again.
Yes.
But you want a nice clump to put back in the ground, so yeah.
So my tendency is to take plants and do this with them.
Yeah.
If I want a clump together.
Clump. Yeah.
And then just dig a hole. So when you're digging down.
Yep. This is a great time when you're putting it back into the ground to do your soil amending. So you can add peat moss and compost, manure at this point in time. Compost and manure at this point in time.
Yeah.
They're not. People talk about them being heavy feeders. I haven't found that. I mean, I fertilize maybe once a year, but people.
I just always compost.
Yeah.
And what I do is compost around the outside, and I do it in the spring and the fall.
Yeah.
And so when I put this in the ground now, how much farther? Like
let that spread as naturally as it can. Make sure that you fill in all the air pockets with the soil as you're putting it in.
Right.
And getting it settled in. Make sure, because this is herbaceous, that the ground is going to be about here. That these are all underground. but not too far underground.
Right.
And you're good to go.
And then, so once it's in the ground, and then cut this off.
You can cut it off. And
Yeah.
then, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, the thing they say about peonies is at least in good years when the foliage is good, you don't cut it off until frost has blackened it. So you let it nurture the roots for as long as it can.
Yeah.
And then cut it off when it's no longer doing any good. But this year things have been so weird that there's probably plants that aren't getting much nurture.
So that's one of the things is you leave the foliage even after it blooms. I cut the foliage back just a tad,
Yeah.
only because now other plants around it are coming up to bloom.
Yeah. In many years, most years, the foliage is quite attractive.
Yeah.
A lot of them turn, you can see some of them here in the garden, a lot of them turn like orangey or bronzy. And when they're not marred by all this weather
Yeah.
blotch stuff, they're quite attractive. So they're nice plants in their own right, usually. Not so much this year because of just the weather we've had, but yeah.
I'll just make room for you to come back here, Tony.
And you would just keep doing this, separating it into as many places as you want, and then you'd be done, and then you'd replant all the parts that you can.
So,
And usually if you're using a hose, you will be able to see, sometimes you'll be able to just pull the sections apart because you'll see where the natural breaks are.
right?
Obviously we haven't had an opportunity to do that here, but the more you take of the soil away, the more you get an idea of the structure that's there and what you have to work around
Yeah.
to get to it. But it's not rocket science by any stretch. It's just being able to see
Yes.
what you're doing.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at this. And I think the first time that I took a peony out of a pot and the soil fell away, it's like, oh my goodness. But you mention a really, really important thing about planting. And when you're planting something that has this many air pockets around it, so when we come back, we'll talk a little more about when it's in the ground and how to be sure you're getting soil all the way around and not having air pockets around your root system. So please stay tuned. Welcome back. And when I have transplanted peonies, and do correct me if I'm wrong all the way along, I always dig a generous hole. I put compost in it, and I put water in it. And then I start with, part of the roots in, add more soil and compost, and the water I find helps bring the soil into all the little things. It does take a long time because of what these roots look like.
Also, if you have roots that sort of form like this, you can make like a mound underneath them so that there's already soil in there as you set them down.
Okay.
It's a good way to plant irises as well, that you put soil underneath the roots before you actually start to fill it in.
Right.
And then it's not so, and then adding water always helps to move the soil into where it has to go.
Right.
And it's a good thing to check your plants, a big one, especially big ones, like a day or two later. If the soil has settled around them, that's a good thing because it means it's gone down and filled in some air pockets down there. But you might have to backfill with some more soil as it settles. But just keep an eye on what you've done.
And I know if you have a peony and it's been planted too deep, you can take a fork or a ditch shovel and lift it up out of the soil, just enough to bring eyes up and out. And you may not have blooms that year, but you will probably have blooms the following year.
Well, that's the other thing we probably should say, that peonies are one of those plants that do resent being transplanted. They don't like it at all.
Sorry.
So you may have a year or two without flowers after you've transplanted it until it comes back to its own. Not so much so with itos. Itos seem to just take it and come back, but the herbaceous sometimes stall.
See, I've moved peonies around a few times, and I think mine don't know that they're supposed to.
Well, it depends if you're digging out the whole clump and moving it.
Yeah.
That's much less trauma.
Right.
But if you're actually dividing and pulling them apart,
right.
they don't like it. So.
Okay.
Yeah. No, if you're just digging out the plant to move it somewhere else,
yeah,
you got a better chance that it's going to bloom again the following year. But
right.
if you're actually like doing this to it, I would be very surprised if any of that bloomed next year. But it might.
Yeah.
You never know. But
yeah. I think a couple of the important things is after it blooms, the foliage feeds. You see what it's feeding.
Yeah.
It feeds the root system. So you leave the foliage up until the fall, and cut it back to, maybe 3 inches, 2 inches. And I, like I said, I just trim around my bigger ones only so that the sun-loving plants around it have a chance as well. I really, really hope that more people invest in peonies and take the time to enjoy them and enjoy Tony's peonies as well.
By all means, stop by.
Yeah, and try, if you have herbaceous peonies, expand your peony portfolio to include Ito peonies. I have a tree peony, and it is beautiful. One bloom this year, maybe 2, but so my tree peonies were eaten down to the ground by rabbits. Not impressed. And I put domes over top until the plant material touched the dome, and after that they were fine, and they both bloomed that year. So different varieties of peonies is well worth it. And when you see what you can have of peonies, that's a tree peony flower. They're absolutely stunning.
This isn't from my garden, but this is.
Wow.
That's an Ito peony, Cora Louise.
Yeah.
And there's another one there, I think that's...
Wow.
That's Bartzella. I think you have that one as well. Yeah.
This is one I have. Yep. They are spectacular.
This is a herbaceous one, Walter Maines.
And all the names.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, it's like hostas.
Is there one on the bottom?
On the bottom?
I don't know. There was one that the castle one. Is there one? I know there's one under there.
Oh.
I think that's probably the one.
So
this is my favorite one in my garden. The one that Kathy's going to try to show you now.
All right.
Called Mikasa.
Did you glue these?
I did not.
Oh, wow.
It's a beauty.
Is it in the front here?
It's over there on the other side of the car.
Wow. Wow.
It's a beauty.
So, if you have questions about peonies, Tony is a member of Lake Simcoe Gardeners, so just go to a meeting and ask him a question. Plus, he also did a fabulous presentation on peonies. I want to thank you so much for sharing all that you know, and thank you for joining us. Peonies, gotta have them. Bye for now.